child, I want you to take me back to the 30s, okay? And
Right.
tell me how you got your job in the steel mill and what it meant to you when you got it.
Well, in the 30s, in 1933 to be exact, the year I graduated from high school, happened to have been in the heart of the Depression. And we looked everywhere for jobs. We couldn't find them. See, the major industry in this area are steel mills. My father worked in the steel mill, and he was only working 1 or 2 days a week. You know, people were being evicted and everything, and we're looking everywhere. I couldn't find a job, but I heard that the township trustee was recruiting young men to send to the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC at that time. So my buddy and I went down the following day, and she chose us and sent us to Fort Knox, Kentucky. That was my first semblance of a job.
No, let's stop for just a second.
Yes, I spent 18 months in the Civilian Conservation Corps, and I came out December 31st, 1934. In March, to be specific, March 5th, 2 days before my birthday, I was lucky enough to get hired at Gary Works. At that time, it was called Illinois Steel Corporation. My first job, well, that's another thing that kind of irks me even to this day. When I was in high school, I took a general shop course, a machine shop, auto shop, foundry, even drafting, you know, forge shop. We took everything. And I even got a diploma. I can show it to you, wherein I could run any kind of a lathe, wood or steel lathe, read micrometers, read blueprints, make blueprints, as a matter of fact. And on my application, this irks me to this day, they ask you to make 3 choices. So first I said I would prefer machinist. Second, I'd like to become a pattern maker. Third, any type skilled labor. So when the employment agent read my application to me, he said, look, we don't have any jobs like that available. All we have is chipping. Now, I had heard chipping was a backbreaker, you know. It was a tough job. You had to chip cold steel with ice on it in the wintertime, you know. In the summertime, you know, they pickled it with sulfuric acid, and you had to brush it off and breathe those fumes. I didn't want that job. But he said, you can learn it, can't you? I said, well, yeah, I can learn anything. Take it, and probation in those days was 6 months. After your 6 months, if you successfully finish it, come in and I'll see if I got any jobs open. Now, this is the irony of it. You know, I went to a school where we had 26 different nationalities called Frable High School here in this city, Gary, Indiana. And I had buddies of different ethnicity, you know, Polish, Slovak, Serbian, Lithuanian, Greek, Italian. We had them all. And I would meet them going and coming from work. I'd say, hey, Andy, you got hired? Yeah, when you get hired? Yesterday, and I got 3 or 4 months. Where are you working? In the machine shop. Machine shop? He said, yeah, this was the dumbest ass in the damn machine shop. The instructor had to send him to me to set his machine up and everything. Now, he could get a job as a machinist, and I couldn't, you see. I didn't like that. And then when I went back, after I completed my probation, I go back to the employment officer, and he says, well, we don't have anything yet, you know. And it took me maybe a year to find out that they were just giving me a runaround, you see.
Okay. Tell me about, now that we're talking about it, tell me about how specific ethnic groups would be steered towards specific jobs.
Oh, yes. You see, it seems you have little cliques in the mill. I found that out. And they have the outside clubs. There was a club called Sportsman Club. There was another club called Hoy LaCoy. you see. These clubs, members of those, the leading members, leadership in those clubs worked in the mill. In fact, they were foremen, they were supervisors. And when any member, graduated from high school, needed a job, they would front for them and get them hired, you see. And those of us that were excluded from such clubs had to make it the best we can. In fact, the only way I got hired, the employment agent asked me one day, "You back here again?" I said, "Yeah, I want a job." He says, "You have any relatives, anybody working in this plant?" I said, "Yeah." "Who?" "My father." "Bring your father here." So the next day, my father was working midnight. I met him at the gate and took him over there and said, "Here's my father." "Well, go on in. You go on inside. It doesn't mean I'm going to hire you." And everybody's laughing. And so I go in. And so after he sent everybody home in a bullpen, 200 men standing in a bullpen, he picked me among a few others. I go inside, and he gets my application, he writes on something, and hands me an envelope, says, "Take this to the hospital building." You see, the old office building there on the east side of Broadway, just outside the mill, used to be a hospital building, see. I take it in there, and I didn't know what was going to happen. The doctor has me to strip, and tests my eyes, He looks in your throat, he tests you, your heart, takes your temperature. He signs something. "Take this back to the employment office." I go back and they said, "What do you got there?" The guys that were laughing. I said, "They sent me to the hospital and they told me to bring this back." "Well, you're hired." I said, "No, I'm not hired. I didn't know I was hired." And I went back in there. Then they sent me to plant protection. They took me to the 44 and the 36-inch mill. That's how I got hired.
Now, can you tell me what working conditions were like, about how dangerous it was? When we talked before, you told me about how dangerous it was.
Oh, yes.
Hot in the pay and so
Oh,
forth.
yes.
Can you tell
There
me?
was no such animal as safety. You chip steel, and the tensity and the hardness of the steel sometimes is brittle. Some steels are soft, it just curls up, but that brittle steel, axles, and stuff like that. As you chip that steel, and all we had were goggles. We just had goggles. We had no hoods or no face masks or anything. We didn't even know those kind of things existed. And you're chipping, and you look around, here's a guy grabs his face, a chip sticks right in his face, hot, and they're hot, when you the abrasiveness and chipping the steel. And they'd send him to the hospital. The doctor put a little patch on it and release him to go back to work, you see. You're turning steel. Some of these slabs weigh like 1.5 tons, 6 men to turn it. You got 8 men. You got 4 men on one side, 4 on the other side with tongs. And they would say, "Hey," and you come up with it, get it up and throw it over so you could chip the other side. Sometimes the wrenches would slip off, it'd break a man's metatarsals, it would cut off fingers, all of that. And I had a unique experience. I was a young fellow, chipping. And because of my experiences at school, learning, machinists and all that, we had to know how to sharpen tools. Well, I looked and I noticed that there's a certain angle, a contour you can put on the edge of that chisel, which would make it cut better. And when I would go to the rock, the guys would watch me. I'd go to the rock. You had to sharpen your own tools. They would come over, "Hey, sharpen mine, sharpen mine." I sharpen everybody's tools. So one day, my buddy, Henry Dickerson, he's long deceased. Your overalls has that little pocket. I put 3 chisels in my little pocket. And I'm finished with everybody. I'd get my chisels and I'd head for my workplace. And he said, "Hey, Johnny, is this yours?" Well, on your chisel you would grind your initials, JLH. "Yeah, what are you doing with that?" And he would laugh. And I said, "Give it here." He'd throw it to you. If you throw a chisel in the air, you just snatch it out of the air. But he didn't throw it high enough, and it hit a lift of steel. And when it hit the steel, it hit my leg, right in here. And so I pick it up and I go and I start working. After a while, my leg feels dead, you know. And what the devil's going on? I pull my pant leg up and blood's coming out of my shoe. So they call the little ambulance they had, and they take me to the doctor. He gets me in there and he looks at it, and he put all kind of medication on it, but it wouldn't stop bleeding because it was an artery, you see. He said, well, I'm going to have to put a stitch in there. Okay. I thought he was going to deaden it, you know. He got that crooked needle, you know, catgut, and he grabs that leg and, gee, I wanted to knock the hell out of me, put that needle through, tied it, put a patch on it, going back to work. That's the kind of conditions that the men out there were living under, you see.
We missed that last little bit. This is great. This is a great storytelling. Andrea?
Yes.
Is there anything else in the pre-interview in regard to that?
Hey.
This would be John Howard.
There's a mark.
All right. Those were just a few of the unsafe features, but you had to work in all kind of inclement weather. Some of us worked outside, you know, and we had what we called dope hops. Those are the guys my father's age, 15, 20 years of service. In the summertime, they preferred to work outside because the inside was where they stocked all the red hot steel and all. It was too hot. But in the wintertime, that steel was comfortable, see? So us young fellows would have to alternate with them to their benefit. I didn't appreciate that either, you see. But with regard to jobs, you had what we call a run-out table in the 44 and the 36-inch mill, where the slabs, after they're sheared, had to be identified, stamped, a heat number. And they had white fellows, you know, stamping down there. But in the summertime, it gets hot, you know. It was too hot for those guys. They'd fall out. Now, here I'm chipping. I'm making $4.28 a day. The stamper's making labor, you know, $3.76. But his opportunity, after a few months, he can move up to become run-out operator. He go from there to assistant roller, eventually roller. Roller was one of the highest paid jobs in the industry, you see. But they wouldn't let blacks get incumbent rights to that stamping. But when that guy burned out, they'd come and get me. Now, I worked 4 hours chipping, $4.28 a day. It'd go down there and I'd work, say, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock stamping after this guy had fallen out. And at the end of the turn, I'd get my card. I got 8 hours of stamping, $3.76. Complain about it? You don't like it? You can stay home. That's the kind of attitudes they had. And another thing, in those days, for those cheap rates, your supervisor stood over you like a king. And you'd have to go to the toilet, you know. Where you going? I'm going to the toilet. Be back in 10 minutes. Well, some of the guys, you know, had to stay longer than 10 minutes. He'd go to the wash house and what's the matter? I said, well, you know, my stomach, you know, I'm constipated, this and that. When he'd come out, you stay home until I send for you, maybe a week later. He's got a wife, he's got children. That's the kind of attitudes they had out there, you see. I've seen all of that. Now another thing, they had what we call the soaking pits. That's where they brought in these red-hot ingots, you know, after they'd been stripped after being poured at the open hearts. And they would strip them and send lines of them in, and then they would put them in these pits and heat them to the temperatures, desired temperatures for rolling, you see. And in these soaking pits, you had to throw coke breeze in. It'd come in by the big carload. And here, us young fellows, they'd put us in there with these big shovels, you know, to shovel that coke breeze onto a big bucket like the crane brought, you know. Then he would dump it in front of these ovens, and they had like a shield they put over it. It had a big hole in it. You throw your Coke breeze, you could throw it all over. And you had to work maybe a day or two before your eyes could discern, looking at all that red. I'm surprised my eyes are as good as they are today, you see. And dust and gaseous, I'd come home and cough all night, and not realizing the toxicity in all of that stuff, breathing gases and inhaling dust and smoke. And I can recall in 1945, when the war was on, prior to 45, 42, 43, us chippers were assigned to a special yard to chip special steel. They had to pickle it all because they made the Garand rifles. But you had to take a brush and brush that dust off the steel where they pickled it in the sulfuric acid. And when you start chipping those pneumatic hammers, blowing air, it would blow dust up. You couldn't even see the crane in the car. We're working, breathing in that air, you see. Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible.
Okay, now, you told me about how bad the working conditions were, and what the pay and so forth. Mm-hmm. What about vacations and that sort of thing?
The union was about, I had been a member of the union about 4 years. This was, say, in 1939. The union was able to get vacations in the contract.
What about before that, though?
No vacation. No vacation. And that's another thing. How did we work? How did our shifts go? You work day turn, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You know when your next turn was? Midnight that night. You come out midnight. You work 12 to 8. The whole cycle. You finish up at 8 in the morning, on a Sunday morning. You come out to work 4 to 12 that same day. You'd have 13, 14, 15 days on a pay, and you didn't have much over $150.
Okay, let's stop for a second. This is important. Yeah. Now, you said day turn. See, a lot of people are not going to...
Yes, and clarifying the turns that you work, day turn is 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Daily. The afternoon shift is 4 p.m. to 12 midnight. And the midnight shift is 12 midnight until 8 in the morning, you see. And this is the way we rotated, but we rotated backwards so they could get maximum time. We had no time off. The only time we would possibly get time off, something would break down. They'd send everybody home.
So tell me again what your shift was in terms of hours and days.
Well, I would work 1 week day turn, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and a week. And then the following week, I'd get off at 4 p.m. On Saturday. I had to come out Saturday night, 12 to 8, 12 midnight till 8 in the morning, and work 5 or 6 days there. And vacations, we had no vacations until 1952, and the best agreement the union could get was 15 years or more service. You got 2 weeks, and 5 years of service, you got 1 week. So I worked 5 years to get 1 week vacation.
Okay, we have to try not to jump to beyond 40, 41.
Yeah.
We don't want to get to the 50s, okay?
All right.
You talked to me about this a little bit before, but the relationship between the workers and management. In the pre-interview, you told me that they treated people like animals, and that
That's
you
right.
had seen foremen kick men.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me that story again?
Oh, yes. Even shortly after I was hired as a chipper, and in fact, you were an all-around guy. Your badge said chipper, but they could put you carrying water. They could put you sweeping the floor. They could put you helping the bottom makers. They could give you any kind of a job. You had no job descriptions. You had no classifications. There were men doing the same work daily, and one was paid more than the other man. But anyway, uh, uh, you would work these jobs, and oh, I forget what you asked me.
We were talking about the form and the relationship.
Oh, the foreman. And these men would work, and I would see some of these older fellows would come to work, and they didn't feel well. You know, you work with them every day, and you know it. White, black, Mexican, we had the three. You didn't have Puerto Ricans, anything like that in the mills at that time. And we would tell him, look, go on over someplace and lay down and take it easy. We'll do the work for you. The foreman would come by. Where is so-and-so? Oh, he went to the canteen or something like that. You know, we'd cover for him, you see. But then at other times, the foreman would come in, and the guys, had already chipped the steel, but the inspectors were reluctant to come out and inspect it so that you could turn it over. And when the foreman come out and see him sitting down, he'd kick him, you know. The way I told one foreman, I said, look, why don't you kick me? I said, I'll wrap this wrench around your damn head. I was a crazy militant, you see. So they said I was crazy. But I've seen them mistreat individuals. I've seen men say, don't send me home. I got a wife. I got 4 or 5 children, Go on home and stay until we send for you. But I didn't care if they sent me home because I was living at home, you see. Oh, yes, I recall that very clearly.
That's great.
Very clearly.
Okay. We got to change.
All right.
Sound change? Okay, Andrea, mark it. Okay, 1 second, please.
All right.
Okay, Doctor.
All right. Oh, yes, I was a youngster. 1919, I was 5. 1920, I was 6. So about 1921, I understand, I was about 7 years old. The what is it? William.
Let's back up. It was actually the 1919 strike.
1919 strike?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he told me. Yeah, my father told me about the International Workers of the World, IWW. And in those days, because of the kind of treatment the men were getting in the plant, they decided to organize it, unionize it. But in attempting to unionize, they would not take Mexicans and they wouldn't take blacks into the union. Only whites, you see. And these whites were, of ethnic origin, Greeks and Slovaks and Serbians and like that. And after they thought they had just about organized all of them, they called a strike. Now, my father told me this. And when they called a strike, the company countered by calling the Mexicans and the blacks together. Can you do this job? Can you do that job? Can you run a crane? Can you do this? I said, yeah. Well, those jobs are yours. Go ahead. They began to run the mill. Now, all these whites that were on strike had to come back crawling, took what they could get, you see, and that broke it up.
Now, what effect did that 1919 strike and those bringing blacks in have on the second effort to organize?
They learned one hell of a lesson from that, you see. In 1941, or say 36, 37, 38, they took everybody into the union, blacks, Mexicans, everybody, you see. And
I need for you to put it in the context of 1919. You need to tell me because of what happened in 1919.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, because of their negative experience in attempting to organize steelworkers in 1919, they decided to be more fair and to be more practical in later organizing attempts at steelworkers. So they attempted to sign everybody. Well, people were anxious to join a union, but they knew also that when you joined the union, if management found out, they'd fire you. We didn't have any organizations like we have today where you could grieve, you see. And so you would pay your dues. I think first dues was 50 cents a month. And when you'd pay your dues, just like this is December, it would have December on a little pin. You would pin it inside your shirt or inside your work cap, you know, because if a guy would come around recruiting, you know, hey, want you to join a union, you'd show him, see? And he'd go to, well, who out here doesn't belong? We would show him, you see. But no one knew, only the union members, who were members of the union, you see. Now, after that kind of activity, finally they did strike, and this strike was only for recognition.
Okay, don't take me there yet. Okay, I'm trying to work through this chronologically. Now, when you were first, tell me about the employee unions, the ERPs.
Oh,
things
yeah.
that were there before.
Oh, yes. They attempted to discredit a legitimate union. They had this company union, that's what we called it. They would take the leadership, this alleged leadership, in attempting to organize a legitimate union, and it would make them leaders in the company union. Of course, the Wagner Act had passed. They couldn't fire us now because of being members of a union. Roosevelt was president and all. And so this little company union, you know, these guys would try to ameliorate. They would try to pacify, you see. And that was another obstacle we had to overcome. And I think I've told you about the means we used in our meetings where you had to know the password.
Okay, we'll get to that. But now tell me, how did you all feel about, this is before the Wagner Act, okay? How did you all feel about the people that were associated with the company trying to form these unions? How did you feel about those guys that were trying to get you to deal with the company union?
Well, you know, your welfare was at stake, welfare of yourself and your family. So you just went along with them, you know, and they would give you an easier task, you know, and things like that. But all the time, we were holding our little secret meetings in basements and individual homes, planning on what we were going to do.
Okay. Now, the Wagner Act does pass in 1935. What happens inside the mill at that time? You know, I mean, is that a crucial moment? Does that give you guys momentum to move forward? Take me back to that time and tell me what happened.
Oh, yes. You know, the Steelworker Union, the USWA, United Steelworkers of America Union, was started with what we call SWOC, Steelworkers Organizing Committee. Now, this Steelworkers Organizing Committee was introduced by John L. Lewis, the president of the Mine Workers Union. He gave a certain amount of money, and he sent Philip Murray and David J. McDonald from the Mine Workers Union to come into these steel industrial towns and organize, you see. And this is how we began to get organized. Of course, everybody loved John L. Lewis. He was quite a speaker, you know. Whenever he'd come on, everybody, you know, TVs, radios, you could walk the street and you could hear John L. Lewis on everybody's radio. Oh, yes.
Now, can you remember any particular things that John L. Lewis used to say? Did he have any special phrases or anything that really inspired you?
Well, the only thing that I can remember now, John L. Lewis's wife, I understand, was a Shakespearean scholar. And she taught him how to use these Shakespearean phrases, and you know, he had that air about him. But I don't remember exactly. All I know is organize.
Okay. Now, who first approached you? How were you first approached about joining SWOC?
Well, you know, in those days, they had what they call left-wingers. You know, they were alleged communists, you know, Reds. These individuals would give you the very shirt off their back. They would help you. As an example, people were laid off, during, steel had its ups and downs, its peaks and its valleys. And when the valleys would occur, they would lay people off because they couldn't pay their utilities, they couldn't pay their rents. And they would get eviction notices. And the sheriff of Lake County would come and evict these people, put all their belongings right out on the street. It was Gary Heat Light and Water Company in those days. NIPSCO wasn't here. It was they controlled the water, they controlled the electricity, and they controlled the gas. You see. Now, when these people, these sheriff's deputies would leave, and these people outside, children, wife, and all, these so-called Reds would come and put the dad-blame furniture back in the house. They would climb the pole, reconnect the electricity. They would turn the gas on and say, go ahead, you see. Those kind of people were loved by everybody, you see. Now, these were the kind of people, they planted them. They got hired in different areas of the mill, and they would talk, join the union, join the union. And this guy in the 44 and 36, I forget his name, it was John something, he kept after me, and I said, well, what's the union going to do? He said, well, you're going to get an increase in your pay. You may get vacations, You may get pensions, and all that. I said, yeah, how much is it? He told me, so I joined the union. And then I'm watching these guys. Now, here I had about a year's service. I was completely indoctrinated, inculcated into the operation. Here's I graduated from Frabel, see? Here's a young fellow who graduated from Horace Mann. Here's another graduated from Emerson. They would come in, young fellows my age, and we'd show them everything. A month later, the superintendent come out and said, that's your foreman. Said, he's going to be foreman over there. What the hell? They didn't know anything. We couldn't understand that, you see. All right, of course, we wanted a union in there to give us some seniority and recognition, you see. And so these guys kept after me, and when I saw them make these newcomers foremen, what's the union going to do? Well, the union was weak, And I don't know, what are you going to do? Well, nothing we can do. I take the pen, throw it away. I drop out of the union, But they kept after me, see. And they finally made me understand, and I went back into the union.
Now, was Mr. Kimley one of the people that made you understand how much we got, Michael?
Yes.
We're going to roll up.
We're up. Okay, so when we begin.
You gotta say some film. So we don't want my questions on there. You're going to just tell me about. This will be John Howard, take 6. Yeah, that's how it is. All right? Okay, I got speak.
Marker.
All right. Yes, after I joined the union, initially, we used to meet at 560 Broadway, next door to the Hotel Gary. I went up to the meeting, and I never attended a union meeting before, and there was an outside guard. And this guard asked me where I was going. I said, is this a meeting of 1014? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm a member. I'd like to go. He said, you know the password? I said, what password? I never heard of a password. So he looked at me, and I guess he recognized I was sincere. He said, I'm going to crack the door and let you look in there. If you see anybody let me know. And I looked, and I said, yeah, I know that guy. And so he went and got him. He brought him to the door. You know this fellow? He said, yeah, I work with him. Is he all right? Yes. So he invited me in. The inside guard took me up to the podium where the president sat. And the president shook my hand and greeted me, And you're a member? You paid your dues? I said, yeah, I had the pin, the button. And he says, do you know the password? I told him, no. He says, well, look, I'm going to give you the password. You're not to repeat it to anybody, whether they're members of the union or not. And you're not to write it on anything. You have to memorize it. I said, okay. And he whispered to me, expansion. I know it to this day. I know it. and, you can find out how long certain people have been actual members of this union by asking them what was the first password.
Why did you guys have to take those kind of precautions?
Because there were.
Include my question.
Oh yes, no, we we had to take precaution in our meetings because the company had all kind of unscrupulous spies. They would give them extra days of work, you know. They would let them take off on certain days and pay them for it, you see. And these paid stooges, we called them, would, if they could penetrate a meeting, would go back and tell the foreman everybody that was in the meeting, you see. And the foreman have told me, I knew who was at your house and who was at your meeting. Of course, our union was stronger in those days.
Now, the meetings and the ethnic makeup of the union.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that? Was there any segregation or ethnic divisions within the union?
Well, when you say union, I don't understand as to whether you mean in the international union, the local
I'm talking
union.
about in your local.
In the local union. Well, in the local union, you know, the majority, the overwhelming majority was what we call white ethnics, you see. They held all of the prime jobs like president, you know, financial secretary, treasurer, you know, guide, you see, trustees. They were all grievance committeemen, you see, and assistant grievance committeemen. Only one capacity went to blacks, and that was vice president. And the vice president never had anything to do because the president was always there, you see. And that's what it was. And I was well aware of that. And in 1945, I was elected. You don't want me to get into that. Yeah.
Okay, now, you told me a little bit about it before, but the AFL branded the Steelworkers Organizing Committee as communist. How did they do that? What did they do? And what were they trying to do?
Well, you know, anytime there was activity against the status quo, you see, you were branded a red or communist, you see. Meany had a crafts union, you know. In that crafts union, in order to become a carpenter, you know, your father, your brother.
Yeah, but George Meany is like much later. At that time, we're talking about William Green, right?
Oh, I don't know too much. Well, Green was the head. Yeah, he was the head of the AFL before
So can you
Meany.
tell me that at that time the AFL had a craft union? And
They had a
made reference
craft-
to any
they-
particular person.
Well,
Okay, just can you tell me that now?
oh yes, when Green was there, yes, they had a craft union. All the crafts, bricklayers, you know, cement finishers, everything, pipe fitters and all, but no blacks, no Latinos. You see, the only way you could get in there, you had a brother, a father, an uncle, or something like that, and he would recommend you. You see, and you would get into the apprenticeship program and become a Boilermaker or whatever, you see. Yes.
Okay, but then you were telling me about how they would brand you, the CIO and SWAC, as communists.
Oh, yes.
Tell me more about that.
You see, the beginning of the Steelworkers, when we were recognized, we had, Philip Murray had hired a young attorney. What's his name? And he wrote the original terms and provisions of the first contract. His language in Section 1, you know, Section 2, Section 3, management, you know, Section 4, you know, all of those different sections are almost today identical to what it was when he initially set it up. But then after the union got its strength, you see, and got recognition, they fired him and said he was a communist, you see. Oh, yes. But it was these left-wingers, really, that organized the union.
Now, you had told me earlier about little things you would do to get people to sign up. You told me about using people's time clock in the clock house.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me that story again.
Oh, yes. In the early days in organizing the union, we had a clock house, you see. And when you'd come to work, you'd go in the clock house, and your card is in a rack. You'd pick your card out. Your badge number is on there. You pick your card out, and you put it in the clock. The clock gives the time. You continue through and put it in another rack. See, you're checked in. And we had a little gimmick that we tried and we used. As employees would approach the clock house, we would stop them and try to get them to join the union. The hell with the union. We're not going to join the union. So we'd follow them, and we see when he took his card out and got it punched and set it over on the other side. So when everybody was in there, you know, no one coming in, and before anyone was coming out, and before the timekeeper could get there and collect those cards, just like, as an example, you and I were working together. I'd take the card out of the rack, such and such a badge number, such a name, and I'd sign it on our applications, you see. The next one, you would sign the name and all. And we'd turn in maybe 40, 50 names. All right, payday, they would take their initiation fees out, take their union dues out, and they'd raise hell. And the company said, oh, we got the card with your name and all. You see the union. They would go to the union, and we'd talk them into remaining into the union. And some of them became our most staunch union members when they found out what it was all about. Oh, we had to do things like that.
That's a great story. Now, how much we got, Mike?
2.5 minutes.
Okay. Now, when you all signed with U.S. Steel, when they recognized you all, without a strike, okay, how did you all feel? I mean, what did that give you guys more momentum? How did you feel?
What do you mean, without a strike?
When U.S. Steel signed, when Myron Taylor and John L. Lewis signed to avert the strike in 1937. Stop for a second.
Yeah.
I'm cutting.
In 1937,
A minute and a half.
A minute and a half.
All right.
So Mr. Howard, if you could sort of sit forward, not sit back.
This will be John Howard, take 7.
You're looking a little bit too.
Like this?
Yeah, like that's
All right.
Hey, Mike, tell 1 meg.
All right. You want to know about Roosevelt?
Yes.
Well, you know, this depression, devastation prevailed in the whole of the United States, and we were looking for a savior, you see. And when Franklin Delano Roosevelt made known that he was a candidate for president, and we'd had this run of Republicans, you see, all of the people suffering, you know, supported Roosevelt. And when Roosevelt was elected, everybody was elated. Mm-hmm.
What did his presidency mean to labor and to your organizing?
Well, what he did something for all of the common people. He had different organizations that his people organized, making work for people. These different organizations that they organized. They built facilities at government expense. They built roads. They fixed even the Civilian Conservation Corps. They did all of those kind of things, you see, and eventually progress began to take effect.
Okay, we're out. We need to change.
Mm-hmm. Oh man.
Andrea?
Yes.
What did he tell me about Roosevelt before?
Yeah, 3 take
a marker.
All right.
Okay.
All right. When the Wagner Act was passed in 1935, this was a kind of renaissance for those of us who had undergone all of this medieval treatment in our workplaces. And we idolized President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We thought he was one of the greatest men ever born. And he renewed our lives, our inspiration, especially in our unions. We, for once, had a right to organize our own, develop our own unions, have our own officers, elect our own officers, steer our own course without intimidation or interference of corporations, irrespective as to their size. And we took advantage of it. We moved ahead.
Perfect. Now, did that also give you more leverage in terms of civil liberties? You know, did you guys feel that your civil liberties had been violated? If so, how?
Well, you know, I didn't tell you about some of our experiences pre Wagner Act. We used to meet in little groups. We'd meet in his house one day. We'd meet in your house the next. We'd meet in mine. And we even had friends that had taverns or had businesses. We'd meet in their basements. Sometimes the police would find out. And police come in the front door, we'd go out the back door. Oh, yeah, we had to run from them, see? So after the Wagner Act, what did we do? We got our heads together and elected our friends into public office, you see. The sheriff, the mayor, you see, the prosecuting attorney, you know, the township trustee, because when we had those strikes, you see, our people without food, shelter, clothing, they had to have some means of support. We had a friendly township trustee. He would give the family food, shelter, clothing, pay their rent, utilities, and all, you see. As a matter of fact, we would insist that every member of the union vote. We had carpools, pick them up as they come off their jobs, take them to their polling place, let them vote. When they finish voting, take them home. Some people at home didn't have means to get to their polling places. We'd have cars to pick them up, take them. Volunteers, you see, in our unions. We insisted everybody vote.
That's good. Now, can you tell me how it was that you all came to the conclusion that in order to affect real change in your life, that your struggle and your fight for basic rights had to go beyond just the steel mill and into the political process?
Oh, yes.
Give me a little more on that.
Oh, yes. As an example, and it keyed in on me, and I was an innocent person, but I was dedicated. We had a strike, and we advised all of our people, now don't go to the township trustee for any help unless you're out of everything, you see, because his funds are limited. So what happens? The strike was...
Mr. Howard, that's not what I'm looking for, and I have to cut you off because this is the last roll of the
Yeah.
film. But I'm looking at how you came to the realization that you needed sheriffs and judges and whatnot. You need to be involved in the electoral process, you know, because the sheriffs were the people that broke up the strikes and so forth. Can you give me a little more on that? That's where I want you to take me.
Well, we realized who our enemies were, and we recognized that we had to have friends. And so we organized a PAC, political action committees, you see. And we used these, and they were collected funds. You know, each member had to pay so much into it, even deducted out of your paycheck, you know, by signing. And we established a financial pool of money wherein we could influence politicians, you see. And I find out here today, corporations are using it, and they set us back a few years.
How much we got, Mike?
7 minutes.
Okay, now, in 36, our research shows us that there were great increases in the number of people voting, particularly African Americans and recent immigrants, you know. And do you have any knowledge of this? I mean, did you experience this? Could you see this? And if you could, can you tell me why you saw this big influx in terms of people involved in the political process that hadn't been involved before?
Oh, yes. You see, in 1936, prosperity was coming back. You see, the mills and factories were beginning to bloom. You know, Walter Reuther played one hell of a role. Walter Reuther was one of our giants also. And we recognized the power of the vote. And people who had never even entertained. And the first argument, only argument I ever had with my father was to get him to vote Democratic. He'd been voting Republican all the time. See, he came from the South where they had to get off the street, had to say yes or no. Sir. And he just, he hated Democrats, Billboard, all those guys. And he just couldn't fathom voting Democratic. And I had one hell of a time convincing him, and I finally did, though. And he really appreciated it. Oh, yes.
Okay, but you were telling me about people realizing that they had to participate in this process, and that there was power there. Can you finish that thought?
Oh, yes, the power in the unions. We had grievance committeemen, and you could file grievances. Your union would go to bat for you.
The power of the political process of being involved and coming out and voting.
Oh, yes.
If you could kind of finish that thought for me.
Well, after we got recognition and all, of course, politicians came to our door, and they dedicated themselves to our program. In the event, we supported them, and sure, we supported them and put them in. Oh, yes.
Okay. The Memorial Day Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how you felt and what that did to your organizing effort after the Memorial Day Massacre.
Well, that was a kind of day that went down in infamy, like Roosevelt said. I was an energetic young fellow, full of vim and vigor. And every day, my two buddies, both are deceased today, Ted Vaughn and Pat Riley. Ted Vaughn had a model Ford, and we would go over to this Bethlehem Steel, and pick it, help them out there. And
say we would go over to Republic Steel because
Republic.
Just pick up right there. But say we would go over to
Republic. I forgot.
Wait a minute. Now say it. And then.
Yeah, we would go over to Republic Steel. I forgot the name of the temple. But anyway.
I need for you to say that again, but don't tell me you forgot. Just say we would go over to Republic Steel and.
Yeah, we go over to Republic Steel and assist in the picketing and all. And we see these company goons with their guns and all, and the Chicago police, you see. But we never dreamed that they would attempt to harm us, especially since Roosevelt was president and, all of this different laws had been passed. And this particular day, Pat Riley and Ted Vaughn came by and blew the horn for me to come and go with them. And I said, look, I haven't worked a day this week. I'm going to work today. And I went to work. And I get off from work. I learned that they had opened up on him. Ted Vaughn had been hit in the leg. Pat Riley hadn't been hit. And that was a devastating blow. It didn't frighten us. It encouraged us, you see, to move forward. Oh, yes.
Good. Let's stop for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yes. After the passage of the Wagner Act and the further and more complete organizing of the employees, especially in steel, we recognized and capitalized on the freedom, the new fought freedom and opportunities that we had to the extent of increasing our take-home pay, hospitalization, surgery, glasses. Prior to the introduction of the union, if a guy got sick and he went to the hospital, had a serious operation, he spent the rest of his life paying the hospital bill and the doctor bill. Now we have Blue Cross Blue Shield and all of this. Aside from that, we have a kind of a rest period. We don't have to work with only 8-hour interference between your changes of shift and all. You see, we're mandated. Companies mandated a minimum of 40 hours a week. You see, we have overtime pay. We have holiday pay.
What about the politics of it, though, and getting involved in politics?
Well, in the political end, I recall in 1952, the last convention.
52 is too far.
Too
We're
far?
talking about 36.
All
when more
right.
people came.
All right. The Union had become so strong that it was able to not only politically protect its interests, it could protect it financially, you see. And if there were our enemies, be they Republican or Democrat, we could coalesce on them through the various tangents of the Steelworkers Union, defeat and elect who we thought was more friendly to us. Yes.
No, we're gonna be out. We're out now.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right.
I think we got the good.
I hope.